Plus, university tuition fees are going to rise by almost £300 a year. It's a clear breach of a very clear pledge in writing and verbally by Keir Starmer when he made his 2020 leadership campaign bid for the Labour Party to abolish university tuition fees. Instead, he's putting them up. But we'll be talking to a guest later in the show who says it's the right thing to do. This is Talk. Welcome to the home of common sense. Welcome also to Tom Slater, who's the editor of Spiked Online and joins us all this morning. Good morning to you.
Morning, Julia.
I mean, you look like you're still paying tuition fees. So, I mean, to be fair,
very kind of you.
He's very young. He's very young. Everyone's young to me these days, it has to be said. Let's talk election. I've got to suppose, I take in a lot of media. I'm one of those people that reads all the papers and looks at all different media. I've kind of got, banks of screens. Good Lord, everyone is losing their minds over this US election. Oh, very exciting. Closest race in decades, too close to call. And yet everyone seems to be calling it. A lot of people, basically, if you support Kamala Harris, you're saying Kamala Harris for the Democrats as well. And if you support Donald Trump, you're saying, oh, well, the Elon Musk support, the Joe Rogan, the podcast. I mean, huge. He is huge that he's come out in the last 24 hours to support Donald Trump. Rather strange when half the population has already voted. But is it too close to call? Do you think you have an inkling of which way it's going to go?
I mean, I would be lying if I said I had a strong inkling either way. And I think everyone is lying to a certain extent because this election, as with the last couple of elections, has basically come down to somewhere in the region of 80,000 voters spread across a couple of states. Given the dysfunctions of the American system, that could swing things very decisively in one way or the other. So because in all but 2 states, basically it's winner takes all. So in terms of the electoral college votes, isn't it? So it could be less than half a percentage point between the 2 candidates, but one could very decisively win the electoral college vote. No, absolutely. So that's what it's really going to come down to. I mean, I hope for both America and the world's sake that whatever direction it is, it's quite decisive so that we don't have weeks and days and years even of recriminations about the result. But yes, it's incredibly close. I think anyone claiming to call it very decisively is probably just making a gut call rather than
absolutely. And again, people sort of go, well, it was like the vibes thing when Kamala first replaced Joe Biden. People who were feeling that may well have felt, oh, there's great excitement in the rallies. Even Donald Trump with his rallies. Yeah, most people don't attend rallies. Most people don't do any of this stuff. They just quietly make a decision. I was amazed by how many people still declare themselves as being undecided. That said, as someone who would definitely have not voted for Donald Trump in 2016 if I were an American, and would not, on balance, have voted for him in 2020, I thought Joe Biden was the least worst option then. I mean, I'd struggle this year. I really would, and I think I'd have to vote on the issues I care most about. And I think overall I'd end up voting Trump. Now, my thing is that if someone like me who thinks I know Trump is a sexist, misogynist, sexual assaulter through his own words. Forget the libel case. Through his own words, he's talked about grabbing women by their private parts without their permission. Definitely racist. I've got no doubt at all about that. His past policies as a landlord, legal cases involving that. I just have absolutely no doubt at all. He's an awful human being. I think he is a threat to democracy in the sense of he doesn't accept the outcome of elections. He's willing to quite happily do nothing to stop violent hordes storming the Capitol, even if, yes, I don't think he actually personally said, yeah, go and storm the Capitol and kill people. I mean, but if I'm saying, given the alternative is Kamala Harris, I can absolutely understand why someone would vote Donald Trump. And when it comes to issues like net zero, what kids are being taught in schools, you think it's mad in our schools. My God, it's so much worse. Protecting Israel and the Middle East and things like that. I've got to be. I mean, the immigration issue. I mean, it's quite clear to me that Donald Trump has better, saner policies on all of those things. Do I think he's a person I want to be in the White House? Absolutely not. But at least he's not, like Kamala Harris, a completely and utterly empty vessel.
No, absolutely. And I think there's actually quite a lot of Americans, I'm sure, who are in a similar boat, who are famously called the kind of double haters. They're not particularly enamoured of either candidate, but when they stack them next to each other, there's one that they will come down on the side of. And it has been incredible that the Democrats, because of how off the rails they've gone in terms of policy in recent years, because of how inept they've proven themselves to be in governing despite posing as the adults in the room, that a lot of people in America are starting to look at Trump, who is an out-there candidate, to put it very lightly, might even be the sane option, according to some people, according to a lot of the policies that you mentioned there and the things people care about. So they've really done a hell of a job in almost making Trump feel, for many people, like the kind of safer pair of hands, given how crazy it feels like the last 4 years have gone for.
And that's the thing. And when you get the likes, you know, Joe Biden, I know it slipped the tongue, and I actually think that his words were taken unfairly in terms of saying, you know, garbage supporters. I do think he was talking. It was just his stilted way of speaking.
He probably didn't know where he was.
He probably didn't know where he was, who he was. You know, he was talking about garbage supporters. But we know that is what he thinks. We do know. I mean, we know exactly. This Hillary Clinton, the basket of deplorables type language that the Democrats use about people. You know, how could you possibly support Trump? You know, how could you possibly? But I completely understand why people would, given the scale of the madness from the Democrats. And again, the deal with Biden being selected as a Democrat candidate was that he was supposed to be Mr. Moderate. Within hours of being in the Oval Office, he had signed executive orders that were massively radical and extreme in terms of like trans rights and things like that trample on women's rights. And again, what is happening in American schools in terms of what kids are being taught about, you know, white supremacist, you know, the you know, Black Lives Matter stuff, the trans issue is insane. I mean, it's insane. I would pull my kid out of a state school in America, from what I can see there. It's a massive issue for a lot of people. I mean, you know, thank God for people like, you know, Ron DeSantis in Florida standing up against that stuff, but he didn't hack it as a decent presidential candidate, which is a shame, because I think on a lot of things, other than abortion, I'm with him. That's the thing for me, as a woman, and I do think this is more, it shouldn't be, but it is more of a woman's issue, the issue of abortion. That's the only thing on which I would say, OK, on a policy issue, I'm with Kamala, not Donald Trump. And I think he's made a massive tactical mistake in terms of his what he's done on that, in terms of Roe v. Wade being overturned by the Supreme Court. And that's his doing with those 3 Conservative judges he appointed to the Supreme Court. But all in all, are we looking at a threat to, you know, civilization, a threat to democracy if Donald Trump does get elected? Because I think we know pretty sure it is going to be a close result population-wise, okay, whether or not the Electoral College says something different or not. I don't believe for a moment that Donald Trump is going to accept losing, whatever the result. So Nigel Farage saying, look, you know, if it's a clear and decisive result, you know, go and play golf. That's what he's advised his good friend to do. I wonder if that's the reason why Nigel Farage hasn't been on the stage with Donald Trump at the last couple of rallies. Rather just, he got a shout out from the stage, but not on the stage as he was previously. Do you think Donald Trump will accept losing?
I think it would be totally out of character for him to accept losing. I mean, he was getting his excuses in early, even before 2016, suggesting that if things didn't go his way, it would probably be down to someone cheating. I think a lot of this will come down to who he's got around him. I mean, last time around, obviously, there were people like his vice president who refused to go along with this, you know, voiding the votes of millions of people, you know, refusing the electors that have been sent and so on. Even J.D. Vance, his vice president this time around, who is seen as a more ideological person, when you hear him talk about the stolen election stuff, you can tell he doesn't really mean it. He'll often tack towards the more genuine forms of, you know, election interference that, you know, one could point to the suppression of the Hunter Biden story, etc. Stuff that where I think the American establishment is sort of banged to rights, rather than these lunatic theories of Venezuelan voting machines swinging it one way or the other. So the sense you get is that it's, I might be wrong, but I think a lot of this comes down to Trump is going to sound off. Trump is probably going to, you know, whether he believes it or not, say these things about the election being stolen. The question is it going to be taken seriously by anyone in a position of influence and power? Almost certainly not. That's not what we saw last time, and I don't think that's what we'd see this time around.
No, the question is whether there is civil unrest. We know, certainly in Washington, D.C., shops and restaurants boarding up their shop fronts. Again, this is banana republic stuff. This should not be happening in any Western democracy. Whenever there is an election, the conceding defeat and the peaceful passing over of power is the fundamental aspect of democracy. Otherwise, voting has no point. You know, it's such a key thing, isn't it? Well, it's 5 a.m. It's just gone 5 a.m. on the east coast of the US. So the first polls in major cities and towns have opened in the US. Polls. Obviously open from 7 till 10 here, but they're rather different in America. And I know that there's obviously one small, tiny little sort of village where I think they've got sort of 6 votes between them, and they've already voted. They voted at midnight, Eastern US time. So it's all to play for. We're going to wait and see. There's probably going to be a lot of litigation. We've already seen some of that starting
Always
as
is,
well.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, and again, it's fair when you're looking at polls that are so close. And last time round, it being 80,000 people that decided effectively who the President of the United States is. But again, if we end up with all these problems, and if we do end up with a Trump presidency tomorrow or in a matter of days or a few weeks, the Democrats will only have themselves to blame, won't they?
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, they have single-handedly... you could talk about them creating the conditions for someone like Trump to rise, you know, ignoring their Rust Belt working-class voters, and whenever they did talk about them, it was to demonise them and smear them as deplorables and so on. But also, in terms of reviving his fate this time around, I mean, it wasn't that long ago that Trump was held responsible for a terrible 2022 midterms. He was seen as a busted flush. Ron DeSantis was even edging ahead of him in a couple of polls in terms of the primary. And then you had that cascade of indictments, the attempt to try and do via the law what they failed to do at the ballot box first time around. And it almost single-handedly, I would say, revived his prospects, turned him back into the insurgent, made a lot of people forget and forgive some of the ridiculous theatrics at the end of the 2020 election. So again, whether it's their inability to govern, whether it's them demonising people they should be winning over, or whether it's pursuing Trump to such an extent that it actually burnished his narrative completely about the establishment being out to get him, they do only have themselves to blame if this goes the other way.
I mean, there are massive similarities and dissimilarities with the recent British election. Dissimilarities being, of course, that both of our candidates were rather dull, and basically it was just a bit more of the same, or a bit more of the same with a different coloured rosette. Although, again, I think Labour even worse than we thought they would be. I think, and it's very interesting, even people on the left who. This wasn't what we thought we were going to get. They're not cheering quite so loudly now, are they? But in America, again, you know, if you put up two candidates like this, what do you expect? I want to hear from you. I'd love to hear from you. Who do you want to win the US presidential election? Very, very simple. But crucially, you need to tell me why. Don't just say Trump or Harris. I want to know why. Is it because of British interest? Is it because of a particular policy? Is it a personality thing? Is it that woman's goddamn voice? I can't do the face.
A lot of people can't get over it.
Well, we're going to be talking to the brilliant author and journalist Lionel Shriver a little bit later. Lionel made a French all of a sudden. Lionel Shriver later on, and American, of course. And I know she feels exactly the same way I do about Kamala Harris. But I want to know. So, who do you want to win? I'd love to know who do you think will win. Let's see if our talk listeners can actually call it. Who do you want to win the US presidential election? Tell us why. Again, who's best for Britain? Who is best for the world? What are the key issues? For me, Middle East, you know, it's got to be Trump. Ukraine, maybe I'm thinking Kamala Harris. But she doesn't have a view or a policy on any of this stuff, really. It's just whoever's advising her, probably. So we don't even know what's going to happen there. But give us a call, 0344 499 1000. There's the number. You can text 87222. You can send us a message on X at TalkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs $1, standard network rate message. And by the way, an awful lot of pundits are talking about this stuff. We've got the US stock markets calling it, apparently, I think, for Kamala Harris. We've got everybody who's the big expert. They don't know any more than you or I do. So your opinion absolutely counts. Give me a call, 0344 499 1000. Let's talk about a couple of other stories that are happening here in the UK. University tuition fees, they're going to go up from $9,250 a year to $9,535. It's less than 300 quid. They're going to go over 10,000 in a year's time. It's the first rise in 7 or 8 years. It's clearly a breach of what Keir Starmer said when he stood for the Labour leadership back in 2020. One of his clear pledges in black and white, spoken by him in many interviews, was that he wanted to abolish tuition fees. That was one of his plans. Now he's putting them up. Is it the wrong thing to do, the right thing to do, inevitable thing to do?
I mean, it's the wrong thing to do if you want to be honest, but that's not really been
silly. You and your silly chit-chat.
Trustworthy. But that's not something that's held him back so far. I think this is one of those things where it's almost like Keir Starmer is going down the list of things that he knows will infuriate certain sections of the electorate one by breaking promises. You know, he's already turned the pensioners against him if they weren't already against him. And of course, the tuition fees thing has always been such a key issue, rightly or wrongly, in terms of the fact that it is a bit of a mess and it does need sorting out. The fact that it's often seen as an indication of how much does ex-government actually care about young people. And again, it comes down to the fact that, aside from the rights and wrongs of it, do not promise to do something and then backtrack on it almost instantly. The gap between when he made this pledge and when he's broken it suggests that he would have always known he was going to make a decision like this. This is not something that's just come up and he thought we've had to change course. The election wasn't that.
There was a huge cost. I mean, I'm opposed to tuition fees for university at all. I always have been, and I voted for Blair in '97, and I stopped voting for him on that issue alone. I thought that was appalling, and again, it wasn't something in their manifesto. And again, I think it's just a horrible big Ponzi scheme. So it's just future taxpayers funding it all, because a huge number of people don't actually ever pay back their loans. European students come over, they take the tuition fees, you know, the loans, and then they just, I mean, literally just go home. We don't chase them up for it. I resent the fact that I'm paying taxes. My daughter won't get free tuition at university, but I'm paying for Scottish kids to get free tuition at university, because Scottish university ain't just paid for by Scots, it's paid for by Brits across the country. But you know, if you're going to have tuition fees, clearly they have to go up by inflation. I mean, clearly they do. That said, maybe vice chancellors don't need to be paid 400 grand.
I mean, it's become a complete mess, and as you say, the extent to which the system doesn't make any sense, the fact that you know, the vast majority of people are never going to pay off these debts that have been wrapped up.
Vast majority of people probably shouldn't be going to university.
And that's a whole other question, is whether or not this whole funneling at least 50% of kids through university was ever a good idea in the first place, and have we neglected all the other areas of, you know, skills and training that we obviously have neglected as a consequence. So it's a complete mess. But again, make a policy and stick to it. Is it really that difficult? Well,
also cost a policy first, and if you know, I mean, Jeremy Corbyn promising to, you know, basically wipe out all tuition fees. Again, something that Joe Biden had promised to do in the States. I mean, it's just not viable. It's going to add something like more than 11% of GDP to debt. In the next 15 years, this tuition, it's just a massive policy. Future taxpayers are just going to be paying for this cost. It doesn't cover the cost of people's university education. It doesn't fund universities properly. They're not providing a good service anymore. Everything's online now. It used to be, you know, a first-class, world-class university system, and it simply isn't anymore. Let's also, just finally, before we go to break, let's talk about new Tory shadow cabinet. A couple of them are on Mike's show this morning. Well, one of them on Mike's show this morning. Kemi Badenoch has appointed Robert Jenrick, her final defeated rival, as Shadow Justice Secretary. Priti Patel, Shadow Foreign Secretary. Mel Stride, Shadow Chancellor. And Chris Philp, we learnt this morning, is the new Shadow Home Secretary. So those are the big posts. What do you make of those appointments?
In a sense, I think it's sort of reflective of where Kemi Badenoch, in terms of the parliamentary party, sort of sits, because I know that she kind of got tagged as a kind of another candidate of the right, but also had a lot of support from the more kind of technocratic centre of the party. I think that's fair to say. The kind of Michael Gove type faction were quite behind her. So you see a kind of spectrum of the party, I guess, from a kind of Mel Stride through to a Robert Jenrick. I mean, Robert Jenrick is kind of giving a post that isn't nothing, but obviously isn't a great office of state by any stretch of the imagination. So I'm wondering how long he'll be in position there, given he still remains quite ambitious. But yes, an interesting kind of array of people, I suppose, rather than representing one specific
Well, that was the
faction,
mistake that Liz Truss made, of course, where, you know, basically, if you didn't support me, then you're not having a job in my shadow front bench, and then you just made a load of enemies unnecessarily. Yeah, I think Priti Patel is perhaps the most interesting appointment there.
No, absolutely, and someone as Foreign Secretary, I mean, she's not a stranger to a visit to Israel, so that
she
would
certainly
make a lot of
isn't
sense.
on that front. Yeah, well, we'll talk about all that a bit later as well. Tom Slater, thank you very much.